Calling to order this meeting. This is a regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole of the Council of the District of Columbia. I am Phil Mendelson, Chair of the Council and Chair of the Committee of the Whole. Today is Tuesday, December 19th, 2023. The time is 11:18 in the morning. And we are meeting in the Council Chambers, Room 500 of the Johnny Wilson Building. Although I believe there are a couple members who may be participating virtually. And the public can watch this hearing on Council Channel 13, which is cable television, and also through the council's website, which is www.dccouncil.gov. This is, as I said, a regular meeting of the Committee of the Whole. It will be followed by an additional meeting of the council, a legislative meeting. We will first see whether we have a quorum. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Chairman Mendelson.
Present.
Councilmember Allen.
Here.
Councilmember Bonds.
Here.
Councilmember Fruman.
Here.
Councilmember Gray.
Here.
Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George.
Here.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Here.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Here.
Councilmember Parker. Councilmember Parker, Councilmember Pinto. Councilmember Pinto, Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Robert White, Councilmember Trayon White. Councilmember Trayon White.
Here. Here.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. We have the Secretary's report of committee filings. I'm going to recognize Chair Pro Tem, Mr. McDuffie.
And I move to waive the reading of the Secretary's report.
It's been a motion to waive the reading. To waive the rating? No, to waive the reading. Is there discussion on the motion? By a voice vote, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We have the reading of the Secretary's log of introductions and referrals. Again, I'll recognize the Chair Pro Tem, Mr. McDuffie.
I move to waive the reading of the Secretary's log of introductions and referrals.
It's been a motion to waive the reading. Is there discussion on the motion? All those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. We have three measures for markup, three bills for markup in the Committee of the Whole. And then we have a number of measures that are coming through the Committee of the Whole for the legislative meeting. The first bill is Bill 25-48, the Proactive Inspection Program Act of 2023. This bill was introduced in January. As introduced, the bill 25-48 would require the Department of Buildings to establish a three-tiered proactive inspection program where properties would be assigned to tiers based on 8 factors, including the number of housing code violations in the last 2 years, the age of the property, and whether the property owner has been delinquent in paying property taxes in the past 2 years. Properties in the 3 tiers would be inspected once every 8 years, once every 4 years, or once every year, depending upon the tier they are assigned to. The introduced version would also establish requirements for the number of units that must be inspected by the department at a particular building, require the department to provide notice of a scheduled proactive inspection 14 days prior to the inspection, set minimum and cumulative fees for inspections, require the department to investigate retaliatory conduct occurring as a result of proactive inspections, and require the department to provide an implementation plan and an annual report to the council. The committee print makes numerous substantive changes to the bills introduced based on feedback from stakeholders, including reducing the number of tiers to 2, and requiring inspections once every 2 years or 6 years, depending upon the tier the property is assigned to. Providing the department with greater flexibility on the factors that will be used to establish the tiers and assign properties, lengthening the notice requirement from 14 to 60 days, and requiring consent forms to be provided in more languages than just English and Spanish. The committee believes, this is assuming this is adopted, the committee believes that these changes will make the program more effective at targeting substandard housing and preventing poor conditions from materializing, therefore better protecting tenants. In essence, the philosophy behind this legislation is that so much of our housing inspection program is reactive when there are complaints. It would be ideal if it was proactive, that the department was looking at properties before there were complaints and then prioritizing based on these two tiers, that the proactive inspections occur every 2 years or every, I think I said 6 years. There was a lot of back and forth between the committee staff and the department, and I'm not going to say that they're 100% supportive of the bill, but I think we've struck a good balance to ensure that there is a more meaningful and useful proactive inspection program for rental housing. I move the print with leave for staff to make technical conforming changes. Is there discussion? Councilmember Bonds and then Councilmember Henderson, then Councilmember Robert White.
Chairman.
Yes.
Mr. Chairman, I really want to thank you for moving this important piece of legislation. It is a time that came many years ago, and to have it now, it's very rewarding. And I just wanted to thank you for moving it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question around, do we know how many inspector positions have not been filled by the Department of Buildings?
At the moment, I don't know. Let me see. I don't have current figures. When we adopted the budget back in May, roughly, it was around 27 vacant positions. We had increased the number of inspectors from something like 50 to 100. Those are rough numbers. And they were unable to fill all of them as of the budget earlier this year. And I'm told that was because there's just difficulty in hiring. And also that they require qualifications, which the director is trying to restructure so that people can be hired and then get the training, as opposed to you have to be fully certified before they hire. That's a long way of saying, no, I don't know how many vacancies.
Okay, the reason I'm asking is looking at the FIST for this legislation, it seems to be position based. So I'm curious whether or not you're concerned if they already have vacancies that they're having a difficult time filling, that we would be giving them additional positions that they also would have difficulty filling.
Fair point. We'll be looking at that at budget time.
Great, thank you.
Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm hoping that you can give some context for the public using a real world example to show how this legislation would work. So if we look at a building like Marbury Plaza that has been plagued by significant issues, many of us have seen it, mold, mildew. The Attorney General is now trying to take the building into receivership. Would this bill address situations like that? And if so, how?
So I'm gonna skip Marbury Plaza for a second and say that to take a building that has is generally considered well regarded and considered to be well kept, it would be inspected every 6 years. It just would be inspected every 6 years. And not every unit, it's a percentage of units. I don't remember offhand the percentage. But then take another building, let's just pick a 12-unit building that has had a history of housing code complaints. It would be inspected every 2 years, just every 2 years. Now, I paused when you asked a question because I wanted to check with staff. A building like Marbury Plaza right now is getting a lot of attention. And so I think inspectors are out there fairly frequently. Nevertheless, it would be on the proactive inspection schedule under the committee print. So in addition to the whatever inspections are going on right now that are complaint-based, I'll say reactive, there would still be a proactive. And given the complaints around that building, I'm sure it would be every 2 years.
I appreciate it, but it should help prevent situations like that from occurring in the first place.
That's the idea, yes, is that it would prevent, it's meant to avoid the slum properties that we have.
Thank you.
Councilmember Nadeau?
Thank you, Chairman. I do want to thank you for moving forward on this legislation. There's so much work to be done to repair the damage to DC residents caused by years of inadequate housing code inspection and enforcement. The council's creation of the Department of Buildings was obviously a major step, but I think making sure that the agency gets proactive inspections right is just as significant. As legislators, I think we should do everything we can to ensure that the district government does not rely on proactive complaints to protect residents or ensure delivery of quality services. And this is true of everything from potholes to trash collection, but nowhere is it more important than in housing code inspections. We talk about being a housing first jurisdiction when it comes to addressing homelessness, but that can also mean ensuring that housing people have that the housing people do have is safe and dignified. I do have one question for you. One of the factors for assigning points to properties for proactive inspection is targeted to areas with vulnerable populations, which I imagine would be based on census geography. However, I know a lot of properties that are home to residents considered more vulnerable, but within areas that may not meet that threshold. Does the bill consider this? And I'm thinking, for example, in Ward 1, we have a number of low-income properties nestled in very high-income areas that, that we would want.
Well, let me
considered.
see, we can look at that. There are a number of factors set forth. So there isn't one factor that's determinative. But the factors taken together, well, actually the factors individually do correlate with higher incidence of poorly maintained properties. So geography could be one, but it's not the sole one. The history of housing complaints could be one.
Okay,
I actually think that's a more important one. And then the age of the building. So I'm guessing that some of the buildings you're thinking of are older buildings.
yes, sure.
And probably have a history of complaints. And so they would be high on the list.
Great. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate
Yeah.
it. Thank you, Chairman.
Other questions or discussion? We have the print before us and the print is moved subject to, what do I say, with leave for staff to make technical and conforming changes. I do roll call votes on the print. We'll have a roll call vote on the print.
Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes,
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
the committee print is approved. We have the report. I move the report with leave for staff to make technical, conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion on the report? By a voice vote, all those in favor of the report say aye. Aye. Opposed? I don't hear any no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report and hearing record are filed.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does. And it does have a fiscal impact of 2 million in FY 24 and 7.2 over the financial planning period.
Thank you. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The next measure for markup is Bill 25-539, the Shirley Chisholm Elementary School Redesignation Act of 2023. This bill would officially redesignate the school known as John Tyler Elementary School to be renamed the Shirley Chisholm Elementary School. This, as I said, is an official naming. John Tyler Elementary School, which is located on Capitol Hill, is named for John Tyler, who was the 10th President of the United States, with a record that is outlined in the report and not one that comports with DC values. The school community felt several years ago that they wanted the school renamed, and through a process, I'll say a democratic process, something process with a whole lot of participation, the school community came up with the name Shirley Chisholm. In 1964, Shirley Chisholm ran for an open seat in the New York State Assembly. She faced resistance based on her gender, but worked to appeal directly to female voters and won her primary and later in the general election. She quickly gained a reputation as a fierce advocate for the underprivileged. In 1968, Ms. Chisholm made history by becoming the first African-American woman elected to the United States Congress, representing New York's 12th congressional district. During her 7 terms in Congress from 1969 to 1983, Ms. Chisholm advocated for a range of social issues, including education, healthcare, and racial and gender equality. In 1972, she broke new ground again by becoming the first African-American woman to seek a major party's nomination for the presidency, running as a Democrat. Although her campaign faced numerous challenges, Chisholm's bold approach paved the way for future generations of women and minorities to engage in presidential politics. The report tells more about her history and her accomplishments, but she is considered today very well regarded today in history. And as I said, the school community advocated for the name. On October 11th of this year, Councilmember Allen introduced the bill. And on November 28th, the Committee of the Whole held a hearing on the bill. The committee received no testimony or comments in opposition to the designation. And so without objection, I move both the print and report would leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion?
Mr. Chairman.
Councilmember Allen.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman. I want to just thank you and your staff for moving quickly after the bill's hearing on November 28th to be able to get this bill on the agenda today. As you already outlined and explained, Mr. Chairman, Tyler Elementary School, located on Capitol Hill in Ward 6, has as its namesake John Tyler, who was the 10th President of the United States from 1841 to 1845. I think the committee report outlines very well the deeply problematic and racist history of this individual. But in short, his namesake is just simply inappropriate. It does not reflect the rich diversity and the values of the school community. I also think it's important to speak just a little bit about the process of getting to today. The school community got together and began this process to rename the school at the start of 2020. The school PTA circulated 3 surveys in 2021, 2022, and again in 2023 to collect ideas for new names from students and families. A PTA subcommittee was formed. It reviewed 121 nominated names, evaluated them based on specific criteria. And then to decide on a name, earlier this year, the community used an extensive ranked choice voting process that included former staff, families, community members, students, caregivers, and the community decided to rename the school after Shirley Chisholm. And I agree with the community that Shirley Chisholm is an exceptional role model and better represents the inclusive and anti-racist values of the school community. The committee report outlines very well her extensive and many accomplishments and qualities. I do want to add for the record that at the hearing, we also learned from the young students who had studied Shirley Chisholm that she also spoke Spanish, making an even more ideal namesake for the school given its current dual language. Before concluding, though, I want to take a quick moment to express my gratitude and thanks to the entire school community for not only being engaged and exceptional members, but for being part of this renaming process that was, above all, incredibly transparent and inclusive. I especially want to thank Nick Berger, Leah Siskind, and Aaron Kershaw, and all the public witnesses that testified at the hearing, especially the students and young people who joined us and spoke up. I also want to thank Principal Brand for her exceptional leadership throughout this process, as well as to DC Public Schools for their support. And lastly, I want to say that there still remain a lot of schools and public buildings in the district named after people with problematic backgrounds. The process at Tyler, I think, serves as an excellent example. And I hope that school communities across the district that are interested and invested in renaming their schools will look to that process and hopefully emulate it. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. And again, my thanks to you and your team for moving this forward today.
Thank you, Councilmember Allen. Further on the bill? I do want to say we at the hearing in November had a hearing on two bill namings, the second being MacArthur. DCPS was really pressing us to move this quickly because I think through the lottery, they're advertising the school as they want to advertise it with a new name. I'm hopeful that we'll have MacArthur before us for markup on January 9th. And also, I think this bill, assuming it is approved today, will be second reading and emergency on January 9th. And it looks like I've provoked Councilmember Fruman to say something.
I just want to say thank you. Thank you for moving both of them quickly and look forward to January 9th.
Yeah. All right, so we'll have a roll call vote. The motion was on both the print and report with leave for staff. Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. The print and report are approved unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report is filed.
Thank you. And Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Is there a fiscal impact?
There is no fiscal
All right,
impact.
without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The third measure for markup is the Bill 25-540 entitled the School Improvement Amendment Act of 2023. The purpose of this legislation is to establish an Office of School Support and Improvement within the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, otherwise known as OSSI. This office will focus on academic improvement in the lowest performing schools. This bill broadens OSSI's authority by giving it the ability to step in and provide support to struggling schools. However, this bill is not a takeover approach. Rather, it gives OSSI latitude to step in with help through funding, coaching, professional development, and so forth. I'm not going to read from the report. I do want to say this, the bill was introduced on October 16th of this year by myself and Councilmember Parker. There was a committee hearing, a public hearing on November 20th of 2023. I brought it up a couple of weeks ago, but we did not have a fiscal impact statement. We do now. It's a slight fiscal impact, which I'm hopeful we can work out between first reading and second reading. And if not, we'll have to find, I think it's $70,000. I think that's an amount that could be absorbed. But we will work on that. Again, what this bill does is it creates authority within the Office of the State Superintendent of Education, authority that they do not now have to be more active with these lowest performing schools. The bill itself, besides giving that authority, doesn't, it doesn't affect schools directly immediately. What it does is it requires that by September 30th of 2024, OSSI will give the council and the public a extensive report that will outline their approaches that they will be taking. They will then have until September 1st of 2025 to implement the strategies or models for school improvement. And then beginning in September 30th, 2026, they will start to issue reports every 2 years on the progress of these schools. This is really about giving additional resources to the lowest performing schools. And I think is consistent with the council's intent that with regard to funding for public education, that we prioritize more for the schools that have the greatest needs, which typically are schools with the highest number of at-risk students. So I move the print with leave for staff to make technical and conforming changes. Is there discussion? Councilmember Parker.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. I am optimistic as we take up the School Improvement Amendment Act of 2023. This legislation is a testament to our dedication to the future of education in the district. And I want to thank you, Mr. Chairman, for your partnership in advancing today's bill. At its core, the legislation champions a profound commitment, ensuring that every child, regardless of their background or zip code, has access to a quality education. And we know that that currently does not exist here in the district. This bill embodies a vision that is grounded in evidence, drawing on extensive research that underscores the transformative power of continuous support in our schools. Studies consistently highlight that remarkable outcomes that stem from ongoing improvement efforts, decreased failure rates, enhanced completion of homework, heightened readiness for advanced academic challenges, and more effective utilization of resources. I know my fellow council members share my steadfast commitment to guaranteeing that every child in the district receives a quality education. And this legislation harmonizes with existing accountability measures with robust school support systems. And so I'm looking forward to advancing this bill and supporting OSSI as they move forward. I did just want to highlight some of the concerns or questions that were raised. One, the district is not the first to establish this type of office. In fact, every other state that has a robust education system, and many of them that are outperforming the district, have school support divisions within their state education agencies. There was a question around whether or not this will be sending too much money to external partners. And the goal, as drafted in the bill and in our discussions with OSSI, is that over time, OSSI will build capacity in-house to be able to do their school support work, while acknowledging that initially OSSI may have to contract out some of that support. And then lastly, there's been a question around, does this duplicate efforts within LEAs to support schools? We know that the charter board does not provide robust school support, as they do not see that as their mission. And so charters largely are already having to contract out for school support help. And that leaves single site charters that are financially disadvantaged at a disadvantage of receiving the support that they need. Whereas in DCPS, there's evidence in room that this would complement the efforts that LEA is already leading to improve school support. So all that to say that with research that suggests that with continuous improvement, we can see drastic improvement in our schools and the need on the ground. I look forward to this bill advancing improved outcomes for our students. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Parker. Further on the bill? We have the print before us. With leave for staff, Mr. Cash, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Mr. Cash. The print is approved unanimously. We have the report. I move the report with leave for staff to make technical conforming and editorial changes. Is there discussion? On the report by voice vote, all those in favor say aye. Aye. Opposed?
Aye.
The ayes have it unanimously. Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Once the report and hearing record are filed.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. I forgot to ask. On the fiscal impact, is there a fiscal impact?
Yes, there is. It's 77,000 in FY 24 and 558 over the 4-year plan, and it's for one person.
Thank you. We'll turn to consideration of measures from other committees. From the Committee on Health, the next several are from that committee chaired by Councilmember Christina Henderson. The first is Bill 25-321, Home Visiting Services Reimbursement Act. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Bill 25-321, the Home Visiting Services Reimbursement Amendment Act of 2023 was introduced on June 9th, 2023 by council members Nadeau, Louis George, Robert White, Parker, and Allen. This legislation would require Medicaid and the DC Healthcare Alliance and the Immigrant Children's Program to cover and reimburse evidence-based home visiting services beginning January 1st, 2025. The Department of Healthcare Finance would be required to consult with home visiting providers in the district to establish eligibility criteria and reimbursement methodology, and to submit a Medicaid state plan amendment to the Federal Centers for Medicare and Medicaid Services by December 31st, 2024. Home visiting services support expectant parents, new parents, or legal guardians with children up to 5 years of age. Home visiting services are provided by trained professional in a participant's home and include health, social, and educational services. More than 30 years of academic research have shown that home visiting can reduce child abuse and neglect, address behavioral and intellectual problems in children, decrease unemployment among mothers, prevent hypertension in pregnancy, and reduce preterm births and low birth weight babies, as well as improve school readiness for children. The council has recognized the importance of home visiting services for several years, funding home visiting grants within the Department of Health's budget. This fiscal year, the committee moved some of the funding to the Department of Healthcare Finance to begin the transition of home visiting services funding to the Medicaid program. To date, 30 states have implemented Medicaid coverage for home visiting, and 7 more states are awaiting approval from CMS. This legislation would have the district join the majority of states in supporting these important services for families during the pivotal periods of pregnancy and early childhood development. With that, Mr. Chairman, I ask that this legislation be approved and moved to the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember. So there's the opportunity for questions from members. If there are any, Councilmember Louis George.
Councilmember Henderson, isn't home visiting critical prevention work? In the sense we talk about it from perspectives, people have had conversations in the city about what about parents and what are we doing for parents, and how do we help parents with our young people. Home visiting is a critical prevention work that this council has stood by and for several years. It makes the difference from birth to 3 and beyond. We have several community partners like Mary Center who do critical home visiting work, whether it's focused on fathers, whether it's focused on mothers, or the whole family, whole child. So I think this legislation is so important. I thank my colleague for putting this forward. And Councilmember Henderson, are there any other ways in which this shows to be critical prevention work for our city?
Thank you for that question, Councilmember Louis George. It most certainly does. We had a hearing last week, checking in on some of the maternal health bills, and a member of the Infant Mortality Committee testified around the number of infant deaths that we've seen in the district related to inappropriate sleep areas. And so this is a situation where home visiting could have conversations with parents around what are appropriate sleep practices for infants so that those rates will go down.
Thank you. I don't see any other questions. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes, thank you. I'd like to ask Councilmember Henderson if there is a planned curriculum that would be provided to the homes, or is this you go in and you discover what the needs are and then you write the prescription?
That's a really good question, Councilmember Bonds. So each home visiting provider does it a little bit differently. And so Department of Healthcare Finance would need to work with home visitor providers to determine who's eligible, because of course we don't want the Wild Wild West out there. But we want folks who are following appropriate guidelines in consultation with other associations.
Thank you. So can we then assume that there may be both a dedicated curriculum that can be used as well as going in and servicing the family based on the family's need?
So I'm not going to say that there would necessarily be a dedicated curriculum. Like I said, most of the home visiting providers do something different, but a lot of it is around having conversations with families around what is coming up. So is your infant having trouble eating? Then perhaps we need to connect you with a lactation consultant. Are you having are you, mom, experiencing certain mood disorders that we can connect you with someone? So I wouldn't say it's let's sit down and talk about this is what a nap should look like or something to that effect, but it really is tailored towards the individual needs of that particular family.
And I appreciate that. I'm certainly not asking that we would presuppose what a family might need, but I am concerned that this is a great opportunity to talk about good health practices, as a family unit. So that was the nature of my concern. Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further, Councilmember Nadeau?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Henderson, I just wanted to clarify, thank you for moving this legislation. Is it true that this legislation focuses on the evidence-based models that the federal government utilizes and the District of Columbia utilizes, so that when we are expanding the program, we would be still following those evidence-based models?
That is correct. Yes, ma'am.
Thank you.
Thank you. If there are no further questions, Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Does it have a fiscal impact?
Yes, it does. It will cost 8.2 million in FY 25 and 34.8 million over the plan, of which about a third of that is local. The remainder would come from the feds.
The 34.8 is local.
No, 12.8 of the 34.8 would be local. The remainder would be a federal match.
Thank you. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. Bill 25-419, Childhood Continuous Coverage Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I introduced Bill 25-419, the Childhood Continuous Coverage Amendment Act of 2023 on July 10th, 2023, along with Councilmembers Pinto, Robert White, Nadeau, Allen, Parker, and Louis George. The bill would require that any child under the age of 6 enrolled in Medicaid, the Children's Health Insurance Program, or the Immigrants Children's Program would not face a redetermination or risk losing their health insurance coverage under the program. During the COVID public health emergency, all Medicaid enrollees were continuously enrolled. Redeterminations of eligibility resumed on April 1st, 2023. As of November of 2023, the district has seen tens of thousands of individuals removed from the Medicaid rolls. Nationally, more than 7 million individuals have lost their Medicaid coverage, including more than 2.8 million children due to recertification processes. For many, the loss of coverage was not due to eligibility, but simply due to paperwork. This bill would reduce the worry and stress associated with the potential of losing health insurance coverage for children and provide many health benefits. Continuous enrollment limits gaps in coverage for low-income children who frequently experience health disparities and improves the access to healthcare services, assists with care coordination, and allows for consistent treatment over time of chronic conditions. In passing this bill, the district is joining a growing movement of states over the past year who have passed or have pending legislation to provide children with continuous coverage. Just in the 2 months since our hearing on the bill, 4 additional states have applied to CMS to provide this continuous coverage. So I'm excited that the district will be joining in this effort. With that, Mr. Chairman, I ask that this measure be approved and placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Does it
And
have a fiscal?
yes,
impact?
there is a fiscal impact of 299,000 in FY 25, 1.92 million over the financial plan. And this will also have a federal match, 30% local, 70% from the federal government.
So the 1.92 is the total,
Correct.
of which
Of which-
30% would be DC, which is like 600,000.
Roughly 582.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. Bill 25-463, Minor Access to Medical Records and Appointments Regulations Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I reintroduce Bill 25-463, the Minor Access to Medical Records and Appointment Regulatory Amendment Act of 2023, along with Councilmembers Bonds, Robert White, Allen, Parker, Lewis, George, and Pinto on September 18, 2023. The bill was originally introduced as Bill 24-231 with the same name in April of 2021 and referred to the Committee on Health, who held a hearing on the bill in November of 2021, but it was never marked up. This bill would increase privacy for youth 16 years age or older and encourage them to seek primary care services when needed by allowing them to independently access vital medical records and schedule medical appointments. In the District of Columbia, there are a substantial number of 16 and 17-year-olds who have little adult support due to homelessness, shifts in foster care, or other circumstances. In developing this legislation, I worked closely with the DC Girls Coalition, a youth-led organization that works to elevate the voices of young women, girls, femmes, nonconforming, and young women / girls of color of trans experience in the district. DC Girls Coalition reported that many youth they serve were not able to make medical appointments for themselves without parental consent, or had to wait weeks to months for their caseworkers to coordinate their health appointments for them. Currently, DC law allows for minors over the age of 12 who are deemed capable of providing informed consent by a doctor to seek certain medical services, including pregnancy or lawful termination, substance abuse, and treatment for mental health or sexually transmitted diseases without parental consent. However, the law is unclear as to whether parental consent may be required to actually schedule such appointments or to request medical records that can inform a provider's decision-making. The committee print limits the scope of the bill to only cover youth who are enrolled in Medicaid or the DC Healthcare Alliance. Youth enrolled under their family's private insurance could unintentionally incur co-insurance or copay costs for their families if they seek medical care without parental consent, potentially leading to medical debt for a family. So given that 3 in 7 children in the district are currently covered under Medicaid and the Alliance, and that the intent of this legislation is to primarily to support children who are homeless in foster care or otherwise not supported by a legal guardian, I believe that the committee print will cover all intended youth with the changes that we made. With that, Mr. Chairman, I ask that this legislation be approved and placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does. And funds are sufficient for this
Thank
Uh,
you.
measure.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. The next measure is PR 25-399, Food Policy Council, Jose Funk McDonald Morales, Confirmation Resolution 2023. Councilmember Henderson, the next measure is for the Food Policy Directors. I was thinking they'd be presented separately.
Yeah.
All right.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-399 nominates Jose Funk McDonald Morales as a public member of the Food Policy Council. Mr. Morales is currently the Vice President of Sales for DC and Northern Virginia for the Keeney Produce Company. Through Keeney's Executive Leadership Development Program, Mr. Morales has moved up through the organization since he started as a customer care representative in 2012. Mr. Morales' experience in local food systems also includes serving on the board of Fresh Farm, the largest farmers market organization in the district. He is a Ward 5 resident. At his confirmation hearing, I asked Mr. Morales about his perspective on the challenges of increasing healthy food access in the district. Mr. Morales referenced the bodega culture in New York City and recommended investing more in small neighborhood corner stores and farmers markets to reach residents without access to cars. He also believed that his experience with major produce wholesaler will give him a unique perspective on streamlining regulations and programs to ease with implementation. The committee agrees and unanimously approved his confirmation. And so I ask that the council also approve his nomination.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting. PR 25-529, Food Policy Director Caroline Howe, Confirmation Resolution 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-529 nominates Caroline Howe as the Food Policy Director for the district. As the Food Policy Director, Ms. Howe would lead the Food Policy Division of the Office of Planning, which provides strategic direction and guidance to the executive on food policy priorities in the district. She would also lead the Food Policy Council and collaborate with district agencies to achieve the Food Policy Council's priorities. Ms. Howe joined the Office of Planning as the Acting Director of Food Policy in June of 2023. Prior to this role, she worked in several different district agencies. At the Department of Small Business and Local at the Department of Small and Local Business Development, she led the Food Waste Innovation Grant Program and the Aspire Program for Entrepreneurship for Returning Citizens. At the Department of Energy and Environment, she coordinated the implementation of Sustainable DC 2.0 and served as a detail at the COVID-19 Emergency Operations Center focused on expanding grocery access. And at the University of District of Columbia, she taught courses on food and farm entrepreneurship. Ms. Howe holds a master's in city planning from the Massachusetts Institute of Technology. She is a Ward 4 resident. At her confirmation hearing, I asked Ms. Howe how she could help the executive better coordinate between the agencies. I was impressed that in her first 5 months, she has already brought together DMPED and DOEE to apply for a large federal grant for local food businesses and has facilitated the planning between DHS and OSSI to implement the summer EBT program. She has also brought on new ex officio members to the Food Policy Council from DGS and the Department of Licensing and Consumer Protection. I believe Ms. Howe is uniquely qualified to take on this role, and I look forward to working with her on our shared goals around food access in the District of Columbia. With that, Mr. Chairman, I ask for colleagues to approve this nomination.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. PR 25-502, Board of Marriage and Family Therapy, Sheila Holt, Confirmation Resolution 2023. Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-502 nominates Sheila Holt as a licensed marriage and family therapist member of the Board of Marriage and Family Therapy for a term to end February 5th, 2026. Ms. Holt is currently the chairperson of the board. She has a private practice and expertise in play therapy, suicide prevention, and adoption. Ms. Holt also serves as the senior ambassador for the Department of Aging and Community Living and teaches at Trinity Washington University and the University of District of Columbia. Ms. Holt holds a master's in counseling from the University of the District of Columbia, and she is a Ward 5 resident. For everyone's awareness, even though we're moving this nomination today, the executive has proposed to merge this board with the Board of Professional Counseling in a bill that is currently under consideration by the Committee on Health. And so it is entirely possible that we might be back here again. With that, Mr. Chairman, I ask colleagues to support this nomination and that it be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. There's no objection. The next two measures, which are appointments related to the Board of Dentistry, be presented in block. Hearing no objection, Councilmember Henderson, PR 25-503. Board of Dentistry, Diane Smith, confirmation resolution of 2023. And PR 25-532, Board of Dentistry, Brittany Harris, confirmation resolution of 2023.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. PR 25-503 nominates Diane Smith for a reappointment as the consumer member of the Board of Dentistry to serve for a term ending November 30th, 2024. Ms. Smith is a retired attorney with over 40 years of experience in practice law in the district, including as the Associate General Counsel for the Howard Hughes Medical Institute in Chevy Chase, Maryland. Ms. Smith earned her Juris Doctorate from the University of Wisconsin School of Law and is a Ward 2 resident. PR 25-532 nominates Brittany Harris for the appointment of as a licensed dental hygienist member of the Board of Dentistry for a term to end November 30th, 2025. Ms. Harris has been a practicing dental hygienist since 2013 and recently transitioned into dental hygiene education at the University of Maryland School of Dentistry. Ms. Harris is a member of the American Dental Hygienists Association and the American Dental Education Association. She earned her master's in science in dental hygiene from Old Dominion University, and Ms. Harris is a Ward 7 resident. Even with us moving all of these nominations today, Mr. Chairman, I'll just take my little last 2 minutes here to say that PSA to all district residents who may be watching, who would like to serve on the 19 professional health licensing boards that we have. There are consumer member positions. There are member positions as well. This is an excellent opportunity to serve and give back to your professional community. With that, Mr. Chairman, I ask that colleagues approve these two dental nominations and that they be placed on the consent agenda for today's legislative meeting.
You paused, hesitated, non-consent.
Consent.
No, let's be serious.
Yes.
Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, they are.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete for each?
Yes.
Madam Budget Director, do the measures fiscal impact statements comply with council requirements?
Yes, they do.
Without objection, these measures will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. The next three measures were reported out of the Committee on Business and Economic Development, chaired by Councilmember Kenyon McDuffie. The first is PR 25-476, Real Property Tax Appeals Commission, Olufemi Abayomi Paul, confirmation resolution of 2023. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Proposed resolution 25-476 will confirm the reappointment of Olufemi Abayomi Paul as a full-time commissioner of the Real Property Tax Appeals Commission for a term to end April 30th, 2027. Before he was nominated to this commission, also known as RIPTEC, in 2021, he served as a senior commercial real property appraiser for the Office of Tax and Revenue, Real Property Tax Administration Assessment Division. He also has previously worked as a real property assessor for Maryland State Government. Mr. Abayomi Paul received a Bachelor of Arts in Government and Political Science from the University of Maryland College Park, and he is a Ward 4 resident. I would move this resolution be placed on the consent agenda for the council's legislative meeting today.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. PR 25-484 Ridgecrest Court Investor LLC Revenue Bonds Project Approval Resolution of 2023. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you, Chairman. This resolution authorizes the issuance, sale, and delivery of tax exempt revenue bonds, notes, or other obligations in aggregate principal amount not to exceed $20 million to assist the borrower, Ridgecrest Court Investor LLC, in the financing, refinancing, or reimbursing of costs associated in rehabilitating a portion of Ridgecrest Village in Ward 8. The borrower is a subsidiary of the NHP Foundation, a nonprofit affordable housing developer with a long history in the district. The proceeds from this offering would help upgrade both infrastructure and unit level amenities for the benefit of residents in Ridgecrest Village. With that, I would ask for support of this measure and that it be placed on the consent agenda for the council's meeting later this afternoon.
Thank you, Councilmember. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
IRBs don't have a fiscal impact, correct?
They do not have a fiscal impact and they do not impact the district's debt cap either.
Thank you. Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. PR 25-485 Washington U Ying Public Charter School Revenue Bonds Project Approval Resolution of 2023. Councilmember McDuffie.
Thank you again. Proposed resolution 25-45 authorizes the issuance, sale, and delivery of tax exempt revenue bonds, notes, or other obligations in the aggregate principal amount not to exceed $44 million to assist the borrower, Washington U Ying Public Charter School, in the financing, refinancing, or reimbursing of costs associated with the school expansion project in Ward 5. Washington U Ying recently received a renewal of its charter and plans on expanding student enrollment for its unique Chinese English educational curriculum. In preparation for that growth, the school recently acquired property for development on First Street Northeast and plans on using these funds to develop that campus. And these funds, as was previously noted, don't impact the District of Columbia and are in compliance with our home rule charter. With that, I move the resolution be placed on the consent agenda and ask for support this afternoon's legislative meeting.
Thank you, Councilmember McDuffie. Are there questions from members? Madam General Counsel, is the measure legally and technically sufficient for our consideration?
Yes, it is.
Madam Secretary, is the record complete?
Yes, it is.
Madam Budget Director, does the measure's fiscal impact statement comply with council requirements?
Yes, it does.
Without objection, this measure will be placed on the consent agenda for today's additional legislative meeting. That completes the business for this committee of the whole meeting. The next legislative meeting, well, there'll be a legislative meeting in 5 minutes, and then the next regularly scheduled legislative meeting will be January 9th, probably preceded by a committee of the whole. Committee of the wholes are nice. This is the committee of the whole meeting. We like committee of the whole meetings. With that, we're going to take 5 minutes. That means 12:20. That means 12:20. We'll start the legislative meeting. The time is 12:17 and this meeting's adjourned. I heard you. One, two. I'm calling to order this meeting. This is a meeting of the Council of the District of Columbia. It's an additional meeting, the 18th legislative meeting of Council Period 25. I'm Phil Mendelson, Chairman of the Council. Today is Tuesday, December 19th, 2023. The time is 12:22 in the afternoon. We always begin our legislative meetings with a moment of silence, opportunity for reflection, if that could be respected in the chamber as well as those participating virtually, for a moment of silence. Madam Secretary, would you please call the roll?
Councilmember Allen,
I'm here.
thank you. Councilmember Bonds,
Here.
Councilmember Fruman. Councilmember Fruman. Councilmember Gray.
Yeah.
Councilmember Henderson.
Here.
Councilmember Lewis George.
Here.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Here.
Chairman Mendelson.
Present.
Councilmember Nadeau. Here. Councilmember Parker.
Here.
Councilmember Pinto.
Present.
Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Trayon White.
Present.
Mr. Chairman, you have a quorum.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. This is an additional meeting, so we already did the logs at the Committee of the Whole. We have the consent agenda before us. Are there any changes to the consent agenda? The consent agenda is all of page 2, 3 items on page 3, and all of page 1. Not hearing any changes to the consent agenda. Madam Secretary, the vote, this is a roll call vote on the consent agenda, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Robert White. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman. Councilmember Fruman. Councilmember Gray.
Here.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 absent.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The consent agenda is approved unanimously. We'll turn to the non-consent agenda. Beginning on page 3, the first item is Public Charter School Board Term Clarification Amendment Act of 2023. Well, that's the way it's listed on the agenda, but it was retitled in the Committee of the Whole, the Term Clarification Amendment Act of 2023. Bill 25-342. It's on non-consent because I circulated an amendment yesterday. And the amendment includes additional amendments to the Administrative Procedure Act and the District of Columbia Codification Act to clarify that publication in the register is not a prerequisite for an act or resolution becoming effective. As has been practiced, an act is effective after approval by the mayor and completion of the congressional review period. Unless it's an emergency act, a resolution is effective upon its adoption by the council unless the council desires to delay effectiveness to an applicability clause. These amendments that I circulated and are moving now allow council to follow the current practice of publishing resolutions, acts, and laws in the register. In addition, a technical amendment is made to the Public Charter School Board term clarification, which is being included at the recommendation of the general counsel. So I move the amendment, and as I said, it was circulated, I believe, yesterday. Is there any discussion on the amendment? And if not, I'll ask if there's any objection. If there's no objection, it will be approved. It is approved without objection. We have the bill as amended. Is there discussion? All right, we will have a roll call on the bill. This is final reading on Bill 25-342. It includes the amendment that was just adopted without objection. Madam Secretary, please call the roll.
Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman.
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill as amended is approved unanimously. The next measure is Bill 25-194. It's listed on the agenda as Pay Scale and Benefits Disclosure Amendment Act of 2023. It is now known as the Wage Transparency Omnibus Amendment Act of 2023. It's on non-consent because Councilmember Bonds has an amendment, which I believe was circulated last night. And Councilmember Bonds, you were the one who moved this for your committee. If you would present this, please, as well as the amendment.
All right, thank you very much, Chairman. The amendment has been circulated and technically what the amendment does, it answers a couple of questions that were posed here on the dais during the first vote. And that is a definition of the employer. And we think we've answered that, as well as we have answered the question of whether or not the full schedule of benefits, what that includes, and it includes salary, and whether or not the employer is offering health benefits. And the question is whether or not, and that those are the changes that we have made to the bill.
So you're moving the amendment.
Yes.
Is there discussion? There's no objection. Councilmember Parker?
Thank you. Councilmember Bunce, there was also a question about the relationship of the legislation with DOES in terms of enforcement. Does this amendment address that, or was there any effort to address that?
It did not change we did not change the relationship. And so it does answer that question. That was not an area that we dealt with. We understand that there is some desire to have DOES to be the sort of like the arbitrator. But I think currently the law stipulates that it's done through the Attorney General's office, if there is a question.
Thank you.
If there's no objection, the amendment will be accepted. Not hearing any objection, the amendment is accepted.
Thank you.
We have the bill as amended before us. Discussion. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Mr. Chairman.
Oh, Councilmember Pinto?
Hi, thank you so much. Sorry, I wasn't sure, Councilmember Bonds, if you were gonna speak to this, but I really appreciate you and your team for working with me and my team over the last several days on making some of these fixes. And as I talked about last time, I think this is a really important bill for transparency to address the pay gap that we continue to see. But want to make sure that we're not being overly broad in requiring, an ad hoc employment relationship, someone offering services in their, requesting services in their home, for example, to be subject to this. So I appreciate the thought around defining an employer-employee relationship, but excluding independent contractors. Now, I worry that excluding all independent contractors may be too broad of an exception, because then even if you're an employer in the regular course of business and hire dozens and dozens of independent contractors, you now wouldn't have to post this information. I also have an amendment about providing a date certain for this bill to go into effect, which would be June 30th. And I have some concerns about enforceability with DOES, as is usually done in the wage theft context. As you know, DOES will look at these cases in the first instance, and then for a larger pattern and practice case could go to OAG. And so for those reasons, I think that this bill is a really important thing. I want to continue working with you to get it into a workable place. But I worry if we vote for this bill today, we're just going to be back here trying to hammer out some of these details at a later date. And so would like to request Councilmember Bonds, if it's okay with you, if we can postpone this vote until January 9th, so we can work out some of the outstanding technical implementation details.
Mr. Chairman, may I?
Councilmember Bonds.
Thank you. Firstly, the bill that we are amending is Act 2531. And that bill does not already, independent contractors are excluded. If you look at the definition, section 2, it defines what an employer is, and it does not specify that independent contractors are included in that category. It is focused on those that will have a contractual arrangement. And so we actually attempted to work with the current law as opposed to adding categories to the current law, if that helps. And as it relates to having a time frame for it to be applicable, we were very much open to a couple of suggestions we received. One was 90 days, and other was 6 months. And we had expected a friendly amendment that would speak to one of those timeframes.
Yeah. Okay, so Mr. Chairman, why don't we do this first? First, I'd like to move an amendment that I hope can be accepted as friendly for a date certain of applicability of June 30th. That should be in everyone's inboxes now.
I don't know if we've received it yet, since we're the maker of the amendment.
This could be done as
Yes,
an
we
oral
don't.
amendment. If all it is adding an applicability section that says this bill is applicable as of June 30th. Let me just review for a second. This will probably be enrolled beginning of the year, since next week is between the holidays. And it would go to the mayor, and she has 10 days. So it would go to Congress about January 20th. Oh,
Chairman.
hold on, my February.
So the applicable date would be, yeah, that's what we said, yeah. Yeah. So, Mr. Chairman, are we speaking of 6
Not yet.
months?
So it would go to Congress beginning of February, and the 30 days would be February, March, so become applicable about April 1st, roughly.
All right.
So
So-
you would have an applicability date of June 30th, Councilmember Pinto?
That's right. And the amendment was circulated by Lynn Groff, my legislative director, at 12:33.
Yes.
But I'm assuming, since I haven't seen it, that it was to add an applicability section.
Yeah. we
Okay,
just
so
saw it.
you're moving an applicability section 3 This act shall apply as of June 30th, 2024.
Yes.
Chairman.
If there's no objection.
Can
Councilmember
I ask a
McDuffie.
question? I don't want to object because
Councilmember McDuffie.
I want to thank Councilmember Bonds and her team for working with my team as well to make the amendments that I'm supporting today. And I appreciate the amendment that Councilmember is raising here. Would it not be, so I think in order to make sure that the business community has enough time to understand the impact of the law and perhaps for the agencies to be in a position to enforce, would it not be clear rather than speculate as to when it would be enrolled, et cetera, just to say 6 months after, enforcement is 6 months after?
Less clear.
Is it less clear? After the
6
effective date of
months.
the law?
Yes.
6 months after the effective date of the law is less clear today than a date certain like June
Yeah,
30th.
a date certain is
So
a friendly amendment.
you, okay, all right, so.
Yeah,
so-
we can accept that.
Okay, all right,
Mhm.
I won't interject if that is a clear way to go about it.
All right, so if there's no objection, the amendment of of establishing a section 3 to read applicability, this act shall apply as of June 30th, 2024. There's no objection, it's accepted.
It
Hearing no
is.
objection, it's accepted. Further, Councilmember Pinto.
Thank you. And thank you for that, Councilmember Bonds. And Councilmember Duffy, I'll just say to this, I hear you, but I do think it's important to have a date, not just for this law, but as we contemplate other things moving forward, so everybody's on the same page and not having to do extra homework of when was it passed the council? When did it receive the mayor's signature? When did it go through Congress? So I think that it's a better standard to apply in the future as well to a specific date. So I'd now like to move that we postpone this vote until January 9th. I think a lot of progress has been done. I think that this bill is a really important thing, but I do think there are some remaining questions about independent contractors, how we can be crystal clear about in-home services, and the enforcement role of OAG. I appreciate that DOES has a lot on their plate, as does OAG, and just want to make sure that we can all feel confident that this can be implemented as intended and enforced as intended, as opposed to passing something that I anticipate we will have to come back and fix at a later date. So I'd like to move to postpone until January 9th.
Councilmember Bonds.
Chairman, I'm prepared for us to take a vote today. I think we have worked hard and fast to reach an understanding of how we are looking at wage transparency in the community. And Councilmember McDuffie has worked with us on this issue. And we feel that we have described employer and employee almost to the limits of what the language really requires. And one of the things we do not want is to send a message to our broader community and our business community that transparency in hiring is not an important matter. And we certainly don't want this to end up being a situation where we can never reach a clear understanding of independent contractor and how an independent contractor is defined within our society in such a way that we end up with a dead piece of legislation, to be very honest.
All right, so we have a motion on the floor to postpone
Yes.
this to January 9th. Councilmember Bonds is not accepting that. Further discussion on the
Yeah.
motion,
One is,
Councilmember Parker?
what were you, Vince? Don't
I have
you,
a,
Vince?
I have a question that I would like to pose, but is this, are you entertaining questions on Bonds's motion or Councilmember Pinto's motion? Just for
Councilmember
clarity.
Pinto's motion has the floor. and that is to postpone to January 9th.
Well, I too have questions around the enforcement. I think this is a very important bill. It's good to now have clarity that we're thinking about enforcement in terms of the Office of the Attorney General, but it's still unclear what mechanisms businesses or one applying for a job might leverage with that office. So the question there being, what clarity might be gained by January 9th? Or Councilmember Bonds, what clarity do you already have that could inform my decision of how to move forward? as it
All within
relates to
5 minutes
enforcement?
or 2 minutes left.
Very quickly, currently within this measure, this law, DOES has a role. And what we were trying to do is add the Attorney General because there may be situations where actions have to be taken. And one of the things that has happened in the past is DOES can collect the data, but it really doesn't do the adequate enforcement. So this was adding to the existing law. If you look at the law, it's very clear.
Okay,
I
thank
want to
you.
reserve some time for Councilmember Pinto if she wants to answer.
Of course.
Thank you for your question, Councilmember Parker. I mean, I will just say, I have no bad intentions here of trying to kill this bill. I believe in this bill. I co-introduced this bill. I want this bill to get passed. I think that there is more efforts to figure out our definition of employer right now has it at if you employ one person, but then accepts any independent contractor. Earlier today, we voted on a bill for minimum wage clarification so that our independent contractors can have the benefit of our minimum wage laws in the district, which I think is a direction that we want to head in. And so creating an entire exception class for all independent contractors may be too broad. Similarly with DOES, we need to figure out if DOES has the mechanisms to bring these cases. What will that look like if it's against an individual employer? What will that look like if it's a sole proprietorship? Does OAG have the staffing right now to bring these cases? What I don't want to happen is us pass this today and then lead to more confusion, as opposed to taking a couple weeks to try to hammer out some of these details and definitions so that we can all feel confident. This is not coming to me from some group or entity that is opposed to this bill. This is just as I read the language and think about practical implementation concerns, there are dozens of examples that come to mind that this doesn't seem as clear as it could be. And I'm confident that we can get there, but we need a little more time and in partnership with Councilmember Bonds and with General Counsel's office to make sure we're passing what we intend to pass. And that's why-
Thank you.
Thank you.
Councilmember Fruman.
Thank you very much, Chairman Mendelson. Councilmember Bonds, I can imagine the frustration you must be feeling right now because here we are in the middle of this, an inch away from the goal line. I am a strong supporter of this bill in principle. I make one observation, which is we just accepted an amendment to have a date certain of June 30th. And if this bill passes today, it will take effect June 30th. And if this bill passes on January 9th, it will take effect on June 30th. So I don't see any harm from waiting a couple of weeks. I don't know that there's a benefit, but I don't see any harm. And I would say to you that I'll support this bill on January 9th in the form that you feel comfortable with, but why not take a couple of weeks to make sure that Councilmember Pinto and others feel completely comfortable.
Thank you, Councilmember Fruman. If there's nothing further, we have the vote on the motion to postpone to January 9th. By a voice vote, all those in favor of the motion to
Mr. Chairman, can we have
postpone.
a roll call vote, please?
Madam Secretary, would you call the roll vote as on the motion to postpone to January 9th?
Councilmember Trahan White.
No.
Councilmember Trahan White votes no. Councilmember Allen.
Nope.
Councilmember Allen votes no. Councilmember Bonds.
No.
Councilmember Bonds votes no. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
No.
Councilmember Henderson votes no. Councilmember Louis George.
No.
Councilmember Louis George votes no. Councilmember McDuffie.
No.
Councilmember McDuffie votes no. Chairman Mendelson.
No.
Chairman Mendelson votes no. Councilmember Nadeau.
No.
Councilmember Nadeau votes no. Councilmember Parker.
No.
Councilmember Parker votes no. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
No.
Councilmember Robert White votes no. Mr. Chairman, there are 3 yeses and 10 nos.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The motion to postpone fails. Is there further on the bill?
So moved with
It's
the
already been moved and it's on
amendment.
the floor.
Okay.
If there's nothing further on the bill, Madam Secretary, you called the roll on the last one. We'll do a roll call on this. The vote is on the bill as amended.
Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
No.
Councilmember Pinto votes no. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 no.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill is approved. The next measure is PR 25-474, Board of Library Trustees, Maria Peace, confirmation resolution of 2023. Councilmember Trahan White.
Thank you, Chairman. Want to reintroduce PR 25-474, was Miss Maria Peace to the Board of Library Trustees. This resolution was introduced by Chairman Mendelson on behalf of Mayor Bowser on October the 5th and referred to the Committee on Recreation, Library, and Youth Affairs. The committee held a markup on November the 16th, 2023, and the resolution was passed in the committee unanimously. Our last legislative meeting, members expressed concern of the nomination for Ms. Peace for one involving a library card and lack of engagement and experience. As a result, I withdrew this measure. I since learned that Ms. Peace have spoke with some members. So some are in favor, some still have some reservation. Today, I want to urge my colleagues to vote in favor of Ms. Peace. We go back and forth about not having DC residents who are eligible for these positions. We have a number of vacant positions and boards all throughout the district. We're scraping and arguing back and forth. And should this person be on the board if they're not from DC? This is a bona fide DC resident that lives in Ward 7. In fact, she went to school at Trinity University. They got and received her master's degree in business. And this is important to know because this has allowed her to get experience as being a professional in DC and a business owner doing project management. And some of the skills she's learned there through financial management, contracting, engaging, and dealing with the government is critical to her role on the board of trustees for the library. I think that I since learned also that she did indeed get her library card. And so this is a volunteer position that she has been nominated for by the mayor. I think we should support her in this nomination. So I want to move this to a vote to get my colleagues support Ms. Peace in a position or as a board member of the Library of Trustees here in the District of Columbia. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember White. We have the measure before us. Is there discussion? I heard a very quiet, Mr. Chairman. I was going to count you first. Councilmember Louis George.
Thank you, Chairman. I want to thank Councilmember Trayon White, who coordinated the opportunity for me to have a conversation with Ms. Peace. I learned a great deal about her, her family, her time here in the district, growing up here in the district. And what we talked about is her using her and her family originally being from DR while she's from the district. We talked a lot about her using the position that she has and what she's gained in her experience, and using that position on the board to make sure that community voices would be centered, that the users of the library who need it most would be centered, pushing her using her voice on the library board to push people on the board to remember those families, those communities who utilize and need the library most. And we talked about the ways in which she would be unafraid to do that, to push the library to remember the community in all of its discussions, the community needs in all of its discussions, and the most vulnerable users of the library in that regard. We had a great conversation about that. So, and we talked about our Ward 4 community specifically and the needs of our library. So I want to thank Councilmember White for offering me the opportunity to get to know Ms. Peace and to have a conversation with her about Ward 4 community needs, but district needs as a whole. And so I will be supporting her nomination today, and look forward to her being a voice on the board that's going to push community voices forward. Thank you.
Thank you, Councilmember Henderson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I think since the last legislative meeting, there's been a lot of conversation and discussion about this particular nominee. And I want to say this, it was never for me simply about a library card. There are only two requirements to serve on the Library Board of Trustees: being a DC resident and having a demonstrated interest in the library. The library card is only part of it. And frankly, I didn't have any knowledge of that prior to our legislative meeting. But, you know, I know that there are a lot of nominees who come through the council. I don't ever have the anticipation or the expectation that everyone is going to be able to attend every confirmation hearing or to have a one-on-one conversation with every nominee. But I do read the reports of the nominations for which I'm not able to attend. And I read the report and it gave me pause around whether or not the second requirement was met. And I'm sure the text messages and things of that nature. I just feel like there are plenty of library lovers in the district who volunteer on the Friends group, who do the book sales, who do all of these different things. And I know colleagues will feel differently. I don't. I do feel like I'm going to vote present today. I just feel as though when nominees are sent for positions like this, when you're going to making fiduciary responsibility and choices about the library system going forward, then I need you to know a little bit more about it than an occasional visit. And so that's just kind of where I stand. So for me, this was a principle. I don't know Ms. Peace personally, and I have nothing against her personally, but I do feel like for the Board of Trustees, we should have a bit of a higher standard. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember Parker.
Yeah, I echo the sentiments of Councilmember Henderson. I did have an opportunity to speak with Ms. Peace since our last meeting, and was reassured on a number of fronts. I didn't, however, get a sense of a transformative nomination, and perhaps that is not necessary. I did just want to also highlight that, and dare I say this, being a resident, even if that's from Ward 7, does not mean you're the best qualified for a board. And I think it behooves the council to scrutinize nominations more than we have. And so I left the conversation with Ms. Peace feeling as though she may be a fine addition, but I think how she was presented to the full council disadvantaged her nomination. So I do not plan to vote in favor of her. I have no doubt that she may contribute to the board. But again, in the spirit of me believing we need to scrutinize nominations more, and it's not enough just for you to be a district resident or to be nominated to be approved. And so with that, thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. One of the, as my colleague said, two statutory requirements for this position is demonstrated knowledge, which, as I looked at the record for this nominee, I couldn't find. I think a lot of people have visited the library. A lot of people have a general interest in the library, but the statutory requirement is higher than that. And as far as I can tell, has not been met. As a council, we have to be very careful. The city is not in a great place. Government services has declined. Our revenues are not stable. Downtown is not stable. And so there was a time where we could approve nominees unless there was a reason not to. But this time is different. With the trajectory of the city, we have to scrutinize more. We have to make sure that the mayor is putting forward people who are going to move the city forward. Otherwise, we continue on the trajectory that we're on, but the council has to acknowledge the role that it plays in this. So I take no joy in it, but based on the statutory requirement and the record in front of us, I have to vote no on this nominee. And I have to encourage us as a council to have a higher bar and higher threshold than a general interest or a warm conversation, because again, every nomination sets the trajectory for the city. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Councilmember Allen.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I was really torn on this one a couple of weeks ago when my colleagues pointed out that Ms. Peace didn't even have a library card. Now, it's not about the library card, but it is about, that's like the bare minimum of being able to show that you have an interest in our libraries. So I'm very glad that we actually took the step we did to delay consideration of this. Now, what's happened in the interim? I'm told she has a library card, so that's good. But I also know that prior to the vote coming up a couple of weeks ago, Ms. Peace had not met with the head of our entire library system. That meeting conversations happened. I reached out and I wanted to know from our executive director, what do you think about this person? And I will say that I was heartened hearing the executive director talk to me about having Ms. Peace be able to talk about her relationship with libraries, that of her children and what libraries and books mean, share some of the vision of what they want to do in the role here. And I think that's given me the trust that I'll place in our executive director of our libraries to say this is somebody who can serve on the board and help move it forward. This isn't just an honorific seat. They set policy for the DC Public Libraries. They help shape the decisions about where we make our investments. They help shape the ways in which our libraries are such civic hubs in our neighborhoods, in our communities. They're so much more than just grabbing a book off the shelf. I also hope, though, kind of echoing what my colleagues have said throughout this in the last few minutes, we've got to have a higher expectation of the scrutiny of the people that are stepping forward. I'm grateful for everybody who puts their hand up and says they want to help serve their city and serve on a board. We are lucky to have folks that want to do that. But we know that in these positions, we've got to make sure somebody's got a vision. Somebody wants to come in to put in and do the hard work. And I don't think the hard work was put in up until a couple of weeks ago. And I'm heartened that we've seen some hustle and some work, but I hope that for everybody, and especially the administration, as they send nominees down, that they select people who meet the statutory requirements and put the hard work in on the front end, so we don't have another episode like this. So I'm looking forward to supporting Ms. Peace today. I appreciate the work that's gone into this for the last couple of weeks, and I appreciate the action this council took to force this issue the way it should have been. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Chair. Thank you. Yes, Mr. McDuffie.
Just briefly, I appreciate the comments by my colleagues, and I want to just state on the record that I plan to support Ms. Peace today. I think part of this in addition to what's been shared, is, you know, occasionally I think the council needs to look at the statutes that describe qualifications and appointments and decide whether or not they need to be tweaked. I mean, some of these statutes are really old and perhaps require some additional analysis on the part of the council to decide whether they should be changed. I will say, when nominees are put forward, it shouldn't require, although I think, as my colleagues do, we read up on these nominees, we look at their backgrounds, et cetera. It felt with this one, though, that I had to work to get the information to demonstrate that she met the requirements rather than be presented with the experience and background and qualifications that would make it easily available to members to make a decision about this. In other words, the work should be done by the executive to present a qualified candidate. And by the time it gets to us for a vote, it should be clear that this candidate is qualified. I felt like a lot of folks had to do their own digging. I spoke to an official on the executive side. I spoke to Councilmember Trayon White, additional, and I'm comfortable voting for Ms. Peace today. But it did require additional work in order to get comfortable to the point where I am today and really understand that she met the minimum qualifications, which are not a lot. I mean, it literally, it's the bare minimum, you know? It is the fact that and I'm quoting here, each member of the board shall be a resident of the District of Columbia and shall have a demonstrated interest in the public library. That demonstrated interest should jump out at us when we're reviewing the materials, and we shouldn't have to do our own separate inquiries in order to find that information. So I'm going to support her today, but hopefully it's a lesson for future nominees. Thanks.
Thank you. If there's no further discussion, we'll have a voice vote on the PR 25-474. All those in favor say
Mr.
aye.
Chairman, I request a roll call vote.
What's that?
Can I request a roll call vote?
Councilmember Robert White's requesting a roll call. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Bonds,
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Fruman,
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson,
Present.
Councilmember Henderson will be recorded as present. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
No.
Councilmember Parker votes no. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
No.
Councilmember Robert White votes no. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 10 yeses, 2 nos, and 1 present.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The resolution is approved. We have temporary legislation, final reading, Bill 25-589, Green Housing Transition Extension Temporary Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember White?
Thank you, Chairman. So moved, and then I have an amendment to this bill on the agenda.
Please proceed.
Right now, we are in the middle of negotiations with the executive about how to best phase in new green building standards for affordable housing development that we plan to subsidize over the next few years. To make room for those negotiations and avoid killing some ongoing projects, we initially decided to exempt buildings for which we committed funding by December 31st. Then the executive clarified that some of the projects we already grandfathered in are actually going to keep getting funding commitments through as late as March through the DC HFA January application process. So earlier this month, I introduced a new round of emergency legislation plus the temporary bill before us, extending the funding commitment deadline a few months. The effect of the new temp is to overwrite the old temp and make it obsolete. My amendment today just makes the implicit repeal of the prior legislation explicit at the request of our advisors in the Office of the General Counsel. I move my amendment number 1, which I circulated last week and which is linked to today's agenda.
Thank you, Councilmember White. If there's no objection, the amendment will be accepted. Hearing no objection, the amendment is accepted. Further on the bill. Hold on a sec. So we have the bills amended. The secretary will call the roll.
Councilmember Fruman,
Yes.
Councilmember Fruman votes yes. Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson, Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George,
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trahan White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trahan White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. And Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill as amended is approved unanimously. The next item is Bill 25-594, Streetery Program Extension Temporary Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember McDuffie,
So move.
discussion.
Hold on for a second, Mr. Chairman. Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Actually, I'm gonna move to postpone the measure for consideration until our January 9th legislative meeting. My team and I have been in discussions with DDOT as well as with Councilmember Allen. And DDOT expects to release the streetery program regulations for public comment by the time the emergency measure expires. So upon that release, the plan would be to move the temporary legislation for final vote.
All right, so the bill's been moved and then there's been a motion to postpone to January 9th legislative meeting. If there's no objection, the motion to postpone to January 9th will be accepted. Hearing no objection, it's postponed to January 9th. The next measure is Bill 25-599, Hotel Cleaning and Notice of Service Interruption Temporary Amendment Act of 2023. Councilmember Bonds?
Thank you, Chairman. Today I'm urging my colleagues to support this for our final vote on the Hotel Enhanced Cleaning and Notice of Service Disruption Temporary Amendment Act of 2023. As you know, earlier this year, we passed the Hotel Enhancement Cleaning and Notice Disruption Emergency Act, and this temporary legislation really just follows suit, authorizing the mayor to issue regulations that establish requirements for cleaning and the maintenance of our hotel and motels. As you know, the tourist industry continues to rebound as evidenced by recent data trends. Travel and tourism industry in our city generates up to $7.1 billion annually in the pre-pandemic years, including $2 billion in spending on hotel rooms alone. Most recently at the DC Chamber program of this week, it was pointed out that our hotels are again booming. So it makes sense for us to continue authorizing the mayor to intercede in this industry by actually issuing regulations that would establish requirements for cleaning and maintaining our hotels and motels. And so that's what this piece of legislation would do. Thank you, Chairman. And I move the temporary legislation.
We have the temporary before us. Is there discussion? The vote will be on Bill 25-599. Roll call, Madam Secretary.
Councilmember Gray,
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson,
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George,
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie,
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
No.
Councilmember Pinto votes no. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 12 yeses and 1 no.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The bill is approved. Turning to emergency legislation, the first measure. I want to thank Councilmember Robert White for keeping us in business today. The first measure is introduced by him, Fairness in Renting Notice Clarification Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023, PR 25-564. Councilmember White.
Thank you, Chairman, and happy to help. Under previous DC law, housing providers were required to give at least 30 days notice to tenants before increasing rents. However, 30 days wasn't always enough time for tenants to get their finances in order to manage an increase. Therefore, this fall, council increased the notice period from 30 to 60 days under the Fairness in Renting Clarification Amendment Act of 2023. That bill took effect on November 28th, which started the new 60-day timeline. But if any housing provider planned to increase rents before January 28th, they could not comply with the 60-day requirement. They would have had to issue notices before the law took effect. Similarly, any provider who planned for a February rent increase would be out of compliance if they did not give tenants notice during the month of December. This includes any February 1st rent increases for which notice would have been required by December 1st, just 3 days after the law took effect. This legislation is necessary to give providers a reasonable window to comply with the 60-day notice requirement, while also ensuring tenants get the notice they need to prepare to pay more in rent. This legislation was suggested by AOBA and has been discussed in advance with the Office of the Tenant Advocate. I think everyone is on the same page here. With that, I move the Fairness in Renting Notice Clarification Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023.
Thank you, Councilmember Robert White. We have the resolution before us. There's no discussion. We'll have a roll call on the resolution. Madam Secretary?
Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-626. Councilmember White.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion. Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we could do a voice vote on the bill. All those in favor say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Hi.
Are there any opposed? I don't see or hear any no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-565, Home Purchase Assistance Program Protection Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. 45 years ago, the district began a program to increase home ownership among residents. The Home Purchase Assistance Program, or HPAP, has supported thousands of residents with interest-free loans and closing costs assistance. Last fall, the maximum amount of the loans went from $80,000 to $202,000 per applicant, depending on the applicant's income. The way this works is a resident will apply to HPAP and if qualified, will receive a notice of eligibility. That notice is typically good for 1 year, meaning a person must close on a home within that time. In June of this year, council began receiving calls from HPAP eligible residents who were stuck. The Department of Housing and Community Development had announced that the HPAP money was gone. Residents, lenders, and realtors were shocked. They hadn't seen this coming, and they had already invested thousands on inspections and purchasing costs. They were supposed to have a year to close and couldn't have predicted this earlier unknown deadline, but there was still some hope. The announcement said that people with notices of eligibility, quote, will be considered once additional funding becomes available, estimated to be on or about October 1st, 2023, end quote. So while this was a major bump, especially for those who would have to start over and find another property to buy, it wasn't the end of the road. HPAP eligible residents worked hard over the summer to close loose ends so they could be ready when more funding was available. October came and DHCD issued another announcement. HPAP would reopen October 11th with $26.2 million in available loan assistance. DHCD also committed to providing weekly updates on funding availability. No more surprises. This was great news. For some residents caught in the summer funding shortage, they were ready to finally move forward and into their new homes. This should have been it, but it wasn't. Later in the announcement, DHCD wrote that HPAP loans could no longer exceed 30% of the cost of a property, nor could HPAP loans be more than the first trust mortgage. This meant that for HPAP eligible residents who had compiled packages and held tight for months until funding was available, but who no longer met the new criteria would lose once again. Council received more calls and emails. Residents, lenders, and realtors wrote letters to DHCD urging them to reconsider or to at least offer exceptions, as they said they would. The letters included their experiences as local and federal government employees, the efforts they had taken to improve their credit scores for this moment, and their visions of retiring in these homes. DHCD denied all but one of them. DC government created hope and then changed the rules mid-game. That's not fair to our constituents. This is not the way to build trust among residents or in the real estate community, nor is it a way to help residents build wealth. In fact, without this measure, the new policy will hurt first-time home buyers. The Black Homeownership Strike Force report, 30 seconds, Mr. Chairman. So granted. 30 seconds, Jim.
1 minute without objection.
Thank you. The Black Homeownership Strike Force report clearly lays out the barriers Black residents face in attempting to find and purchase a home. We should not allow the DC government to be another barrier to those who need the support the most. The legislation I'm moving today simply allows people already deemed eligible to move forward with HPAP under the same rules that existed when they entered the program. They too deserve access to the remaining $6 million in available HPAP funding. With that, I move the Home Purchase Assistance Program Protection Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023.
Thank you, Councilmember. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? Councilmember Parker?
Thank you. And thank you, Councilmember White, for your work to ensure that eligibility changes to the Home Purchase Assistance Program does not pull the rug out from hardworking district residents. I will be voting yes, and wanted to take a moment to express serious concern about the mismanagement of the HPAP program by the Department of Housing and Community Development. Over a year ago, to much fanfare, Mayor Bowser announced that DHCD would be increasing the amount of assistance that HPAP would provide. On paper, that was a wonderful and welcome change. However, the ensuing months have demonstrated just how ill-prepared the agency was to actually deliver on that promise. Instead of budgeting for that increased assistance to deliver on the promise made to prospective homeowners, DHCD burned through funds until they were gone. The result of this mismanagement is that numerous district residents who had relied on HPAP spent thousands of dollars out of pocket to prepare for home purchases and were suddenly told that assistance was no longer available to them. Worse, when funds were restored in the new fiscal year, DHCD appears to have had no plan to make good on the promises previously made. Instead, many residents have discovered this fall that they are no longer eligible for HPAP, either because of rule changes DHCD has pushed or because their own personal circumstances have changed. Home ownership is more than a financial milestone. It is a core component of our efforts to build stable, healthy communities. By not following through on its promise to HPAP applicants, DHCD is not just altering the course of individual lives, but also by compromising trust in district government. We must ensure that the path to home ownership in the district is reliable and do right by every resident who relies on our promises to fulfill their dream of calling Washington, D.C. their permanent home. So again, I do plan to vote for this emergency and encourage my colleagues to do the same. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. If there's no further discussion, we have the declaration before us. Madam Secretary, would you call the roll?
Councilmember Louis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Louis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White, can you turn your camera on for me, please? I'll come back. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Can you turn your camera on? Thank
on.
you. Thank you so much. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. For those who are participating virtually, the Secretary requires that members have their camera on when they're voting. We have the Bill 25-628, Councilmember White.
So moved, Mr. Chairman.
Discussion. The vote will be on Bill 25-628. Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we could do a voice vote. All those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any no votes? I don't see or hear any no votes. The bill is approved unanimously. The next measure is PR 25-562, Reverse Mortgage Insurance and Tax Payment Program, Second Extension Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Chairman. The Reverse Mortgage Foreclosure Prevention Amendment Act of 2018 established the DC Housing Finance Agency's Reverse Mortgage Insurance and Tax Payment Program, or REMIT. REMIT was created to pay overdue property taxes and insurance for reverse mortgage borrowers who might lose their homes to foreclosure because of non-payment of taxes. Subsequently, we added condominium fees and homeowners association fees as well. The program is strictly for seniors over the age of 62 and was originally funded with $500,000. Since the original pilot program expired, REMIT has been extended through a number of emergency and temporary measures. The most recent emergency and temporary passed by this body unanimously and would expire on January 25th. Councilmember Bonds introduced a permanent version of this legislation, and our committee held a hearing on it in October and is moving toward markup. At the hearing, DCHFA indicated their support for the legislation, but noted that the program had effectively been paused for the duration of the pandemic due to alternative sources of funding. We expect to get an update from DCHFA on getting this money out the door during our upcoming oversight hearing. Before I close, I want to thank Councilmember Bonds for continued work on this program, which provides an opportunity to help our seniors stay in their homes. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. We have the declaration before us. Is there discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on the declaration, PR 25-562. Madam Secretary.
Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Tran White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-622. Councilmember White,
So moved.
discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we'll do a voice vote on the bill. This is Bill 25-622. All those in favor say aye.
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 Well, there was more participation from the folks virtual than in person. Are there any no votes? A little more liveliness here. I'm not seeing or hearing any no votes. The ayes have it unanimously. Presiding officer always likes to hear the yeas and nays. The next measure is PR 25-563. Certificate of Assurance Moratorium Second Extension Emergency Declaration Resolution of 2023. Councilmember Robert White.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. This legislation maintains an existing moratorium on applications for and the mayor's issuance of certificates of assurance associated with district rent stabilization laws. Council unanimously passed the initial moratorium in 2020. The legislation around certificates of assurance would supposedly allow owners of housing that is not subject to rent control to apply for a certificate that would guarantee the owner the difference between fair market rent and rent-controlled rent, should the housing ever be placed under rent control. This program has never taken effect and no regulations have been issued, in part because doing so would negatively impact the ability of the district to ever make any changes to rent stabilization should we choose to do so. A permanent version of this legislation was just introduced by Councilmember Henderson, and our committee intends to review it next year. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Councilmember. Is there discussion? We'll have a roll call vote on the declaration, PR 25-563. Madam Secretary?
Chairman Mendelson.
Yes.
Chairman Mendelson votes yes. Councilmember Nadeau.
Yes.
Councilmember Nadeau votes yes. Councilmember Parker.
Yes.
Councilmember Parker votes yes. Councilmember Pinto.
Yes.
Councilmember Pinto votes yes. Councilmember Robert White.
Yes.
Councilmember Robert White votes yes. Councilmember Trayon White.
Yes.
Councilmember Trayon White votes yes. Councilmember Allen.
Yes.
Councilmember Allen votes yes. Councilmember Bonds.
Yes.
Councilmember Bonds votes yes. Councilmember Freeman.
Yes.
Councilmember Freeman votes yes. Councilmember Gray.
Yes.
Councilmember Gray votes yes. Councilmember Henderson.
Yes.
Councilmember Henderson votes yes. Councilmember Lewis George.
Yes.
Councilmember Lewis George votes yes. Councilmember McDuffie.
Yes.
Councilmember McDuffie votes yes. Mr. Chairman, there are 13 yeses.
Thank you, Madam Secretary. The declaration is approved unanimously. We have the underlying bill, Bill 25-624. Madam, Councilmember Robert White.
So moved.
Discussion? Since the declaration was approved unanimously, we can have a voice vote on this. Bill 25-624. All those in favor say aye.
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 Are there any no votes? The ayes have it unanimously, and everyone who spoke out will get a gold star for actually speaking out. Thank you. If there's no objection, we'll consider the four temporaries in block. Since the emergency versions were approved unanimously, that would be Bill 25-627, Fairness in Renting Notice Clarification Temporary. Bill 25-629, Home Purchase Assistance Program Protection Temporary. Bill 25-623, Reverse Mortgage Insurance and Tax Payment Program Second Extension Temporary. And Bill 25-625, Certificate of Assurance Moratorium Second Extension Temporary. Hearing no objection, the four are before us. Hearing no discussion, by voice vote. All those in favor of the four temporary, say aye. Aye.
Aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? The ayes have it unanimously. There'll be a second round of gold stars. Madam Secretary, you'll make sure those get distributed. That's going to conclude the business for this meeting. The next legislative meeting is January 9th. That's the second Tuesday of January. And as I said before, there probably will be a committee of the whole before that. The time is. Oh, yes, I'm being told not to adjourn yet. Happy holidays to everybody. Happy New Year, but we have a whole year to be happy, so let's start off right and then spend the whole year being happy. And I was tempted to say this earlier, but it's a time of goodwill and peace, so I'm glad that resolution finally got through. Time is 1:32 in the afternoon and this meeting is adjourned.
Oh, wow. You've been waiting. Hell yeah, you've been holding that one. Yes. Holding that one. We have Christian to thank for that. He waited all.
I don't think anybody got